The well had been there longer than any trail that led to it. A ring of stones stacked by hands long turned to dust, worn smooth by years of rope and wind and waiting. No sign marked it, no promise was made. If you found it, it was because you already knew what thirst could do to a man, and how far it could push him before reason gave way. The cowboy reined in his horse at a distance and studied the place before committing to it. That habit had kept him alive longer than most men he'd ridden with. Wells were trouble. They drew people the way fire drew moths, and people were never just people out here. They were needs and hungers and fears given boots and breath. Then he saw her. She stood on the far side of the stone rim, half turned away from him, one hand gripping the rope, the other pressed flat against the rock as if steadying herself. Her shoulders were bare beneath the sun, skin darkened by heat and travel, marked with dust and old scars that told stories he did not try to read. Her hair was bound tight behind her head, practical and severe, not a single strand wasted on ornament. She did not rush. She did not panic. She moved like someone who had already learned that fear spent energy she could not afford. He did not announce himself. Out here, surprise was not always an act of aggression. Sometimes it was the last defense a person had left. The bucket creaked upward, heavy with water. When it cleared the rim, she braced herself and hauled it in, breathing hard now, the effort costing her more than she wanted it to. She drank straight from the bucket, water spilling down her chin and onto the ground, darkening the pale dust at her feet. Only then did she turn. Her eyes found him instantly. Not wide, not startled, just sharp, measuring, already cataloging distance and posture and intent. The hand that had been on the stone drifted lower, not toward a weapon, but toward balance, toward readiness. He stood where he was, about 30 paces away, hat low, hands loose at his sides. His gun stayed in its holster, untouched. Neither of them spoke. The wind passed between them, dragging heat across the open land. Somewhere far off a bird cried and went unanswered. "You can go," she said at last. Her voice was low and even, roughened by thirst and strain, but not fear. It was the voice of someone used to being obeyed by necessity, not by force. He tipped his head in acknowledgement, did not move. Her gaze narrowed slightly. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Neither should you," he answered. That earned him a longer look. Her eyes traveled him this time, slower. The worn hat, the cartridge belt riding his hips, the dust caked along his boots, the way his weight rested evenly on both feet, not favoring speed or threat. "You following me?" she asked. "No." "You plan to?" "No." "Then why are you still standing there?" He did not answer immediately. Silence was not avoidance, it was respect. "Because you're hurt," he said. Her jaw tightened. She followed his gaze without looking down, already knowing what he saw. Blood had soaked through the side of her dress, dark and ugly against the leather, the stains spreading with patient certainty. "I know," she said. "You won't last long in this heat. That's not your concern." She lowered the bucket and let it fall back into the well. The splash echoed too loudly in the open air. She turned east and began to walk. Her stride was steady for the first few steps, then faltered just enough to betray her. She corrected it instantly, spine straightening, pace resuming as if nothing had happened. He waited, counted his breath. Then he moved, not toward her, just in the same direction. He kept the distance exact, 30 paces, close enough to see if she fell, far enough that she could still pretend he was not there. The sun climbed, the land flattened into endless sameness, heat shimmering off the ground in waves that made the horizon lie. Sweat dried on his skin before it could run. He watched the way her shoulders stiffened as the hours wore on, the way her steps shortened, the way her hand drifted again and again to her side. "You need water," he called. She did not slow. He stopped, unslung his canteen, and set it on the ground between them. Then he stepped back. She turned slowly, eyes hard. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I'm not offering anything.
It's just water. Water is never just water. He considered that, then nodded once. I won't ask your name, he said. That stopped her. She studied him with renewed focus now, something sharp flickering behind her eyes. Names, she said, are how men begin to believe they own something. That's why I didn't ask. The moment stretched. Heat pressed down on them both. Finally, she stepped forward, picked up the canteen, and drank, slowly this time, carefully. When she finished, she set it back where it had been. Don't follow me, she said. I won't lead you, he answered. She turned and walked on. He followed. The rocks appeared as the sun began to tilt westward, a jagged outcrop rising from the flatland like broken teeth. Shade clung to it reluctantly, a narrow pocket barely large enough for one person. She reached it first and leaned back against the stone, eyes closing despite herself. Relief softened her face before she could hide it. He stopped at the edge of the shadow. There's room, she said. Barely. Sit. It was not an invitation, it was survival. He sat. Their shoulders touched, just barely. She went rigid at the contact, then slowly allowed it, the way one allows pain when the alternative is worse. The shade wrapped around them, close and breathless, smelling of dust and blood and sun-warmed stone. The silence between them was heavy now, loaded with things neither was ready to say. How far to your people? He asked finally. She opened one eye. Far enough that you won't follow. I'm not trying to. Then why are you still here? He did not answer immediately. Silence was not avoidance, it was respect. Because the men who hurt you, he said. Her expression hardened. They ran. Cowards always do when night reminds them what they are. 3 of them, traitors. Her fingers curled at the rock. They thought I was alone, she said. They were wrong. Yes. The sun dipped lower. The heat eased its grip only slightly, like a predator loosening its jaws without letting go. The wound at her side darkened, blood seeping through the cloth with stubborn persistence. That needs cleaning, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. You don't belong to me, she said quietly. I know. Helping does not give you claim. I know. And if I say stop, I stop. The silence that followed was different, less sharp, more dangerous. She turned her back to him and loosened the ties of her dress with hands that trembled not from fear, but from weakness. Now, she said. He moved carefully, slowly. His hands shook despite himself. As he cleaned the wound, wrapped it, worked as though every touch carried weight. When he finished, she retied the dress without looking at him. Thank you, she said. It was the first time she had said it. Night came down over the desert like a held breath. Stars burned holes in the sky. They built a small fire, not for warmth but for light, for something solid between them. She sat across from him now, close enough to speak, far enough to keep the fiction intact. You were a soldier, she said. Yes. You did things you regret. Yes. How many? He stared into the fire. 17. She absorbed the number without flinching. You left, she said. Yes. Good. The desert listened. Hooves sounded before dawn, 3 riders, moving fast. He was on his feet instantly. She awoke with a knife already in her hand. And somewhere between the fading stars and the rising sun, both of them understood that whatever had begun at the well was no longer just between them.
The sound of hooves in the dark has a way of changing a man's blood. It doesn't matter how many times you've heard it. It doesn't matter if you've been in a dozen fights or none. When riders come fast across open ground at that hour, it means they know what they're looking for, and they're willing to break whatever stands between them and it. The cowboy was on his feet before the fire's last ember had time to fade. He didn't reach for his rifle first. He listened, let the rhythm tell him the truth. 3 horses, not traveling slow, not wandering, coming with purpose. Across from him, she woke without confusion. No groggy blinking, no stretching, just motion, clean and immediate, like she'd never fully left the world even in sleep. A knife was in her hand before her eyes had fully opened. That alone told him more about her history than any name ever could. "Riders," he said, low. She tilted her head, listening, and the muscles in her jaw tightened. "Yes," she whispered back. "3." He scanned the land. The starlight was thin, the horizon still a dark line. No trees, no brush, only rock and the shallow folds of the desert where shadows collected. "There," he murmured, pointing to the outcrop they'd used for shade earlier, a split in the stone like a wound in the earth. "We can hide in that gap until they pass." She hesitated only long enough to weigh what he was offering. Not safety, time. Then she nodded once. They moved fast and quiet. He killed the last ember with sand, not wanting a glow to betray them. Their footsteps were careful, placed where stone met dust to avoid sound. The wind shifted and carried the scent of horses closer. When they reached the rocks, he waved her ahead. She slipped into the narrow space first, turning sideways, shoulders grazing stone. He followed, and the gap swallowed them. It was tighter than it looked from the outside. Stone pressed cold against his back. Her body filled the space in front of him, close enough that his breath touched her hair. He set his palms against the rock on either side of her shoulders, bracing himself so he wouldn't touch more than necessary. She didn't speak, but he felt the tension in her spine as if it were his own. The hoofbeats drew near. Voices followed, rough and impatient, men arguing about directions. He couldn't make out the words, but he didn't need to. The tone carried enough. Then she stiffened. "Them," she breathed, so quietly he almost missed it. The way she said it, flat, controlled, told him everything. These weren't strangers passing through. They were the ones who had made her bleed. The riders slowed. One of them veered closer, his horse snorting as it picked its way over rock and hardpan. Leather creaked, metal clinked, the sound of a man spitting into dust. The cowboy's heartbeat became a problem, too loud, too alive. He eased his hand up and covered her mouth gently, not to silence her words, but to keep any involuntary sound from escaping if fear or rage surged at the wrong moment. He expected her to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she turned her head slightly, and her cheek brushed his palm. Not an accident, not a flinch, a decision made in the dark when there was no room for pride. The rider passed so close the cowboy could smell horse sweat and cheap tobacco. He held his breath until his lungs burned. Behind him, he felt her chest rise and fall in short, shallow motions. The rider paused, shifted in the saddle, as if listening. The cowboy stared into the thin strip of darkness beyond the rock, willing the world to stay still. A single pebble sliding under a boot would end them. Then the hoofbeats snorted again, impatient, and the rider cursed under his breath. He moved on. The hoofbeats drifted away, but they could not fade quickly. The riders circled, searched, spread out to cover ground. They were careful now, which was worse. Minutes passed like hours. Inside the rock gap, the space between the cowboy and the woman felt charged, not just with desire, but with the raw fact of survival. His hand still covered her mouth. He could feel her breath against his skin, warm and controlled. When the last rider's voice grew distant, she lifted her hand and rested it lightly on his wrist, not pushing it away, just asking. He lowered his hand, slow as a man disarming a trap. She turned in the narrow space, a movement that should have been impossible, but she made it happen through sheer will. Now she faced him, close enough that the darkness felt intimate. Her eyes caught the faintest starlight and held it. "If they find us, they will not take me again," she whispered. "They won't," he murmured back. "You can't promise that." "No," he admitted, "but I can stand in the way." A sharp, breathless sound left her that might have been a laugh in another life. "Fool," she said. He did not deny it. Outside, the riders regrouped, voices rising with frustration. They had lost the trail. They were arguing about which direction to search next. One wanted to go north, one wanted to double back. The third sounded angry enough to hit something living. The woman's hand shifted from his wrist to his chest, pressing lightly as if measuring the speed of his heart through the fabric. "It's fast," she said. "Yes," he swallowed. "Why?" He met her gaze in the dark. There was no point in lying.
She would hear it in his voice even if she couldn't see his face. "Because you're too close," he said. "And you hate that," she replied. He exhaled slowly, feeling the truth settle in him like a stone. "Yes," he admitted. Her eyes did not soften, but something in her expression changed. Not surrender, not affection, recognition. Outside, the voices drifted farther south, the hoofbeats followed. Gradually, the desert returned to its usual silence. Still, neither of them moved. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter than before. "We should go," she said. "Yes." But she did not step away, and neither did he. In that moment, he understood something he hadn't known at the well, something he had been too hungry to admit earlier. Closeness wasn't the same as possession. Being near her did not mean he had any right to keep her near. Wanting was easy. Respect was the hard part. They waited until the sky began to pale, then slipped out of the rocks. Dawn crept over the land, painting the dust and stone in muted reds, like the world was remembering old blood. They didn't speak as they walked. Their bodies had already said enough. He kept the familiar distance at first, 30 paces, but the space felt different now, not smaller in feet, but smaller in meaning. By midday, the land shifted. The flat country broke into shallow canyons and ridges, the ground rougher underfoot. She moved with more difficulty now. The wound, wrapped and clean, still pulled at her strength. The stubbornness that kept her upright was impressive, but he could see the truth in the lines around her mouth. He offered water when she needed it, nothing more. She took it without gratitude and without shame. At one point, the wind picked up and carried the scent of sage. She paused at the crest of a ridge and looked out. Beyond it, the world opened into a sprawling tangle of mesas and cuts and hidden valleys, land that did not welcome outsiders. The air felt different, not cooler, but more alive, as if the ground itself remembered who belonged to it. She stood there for a long time, chest rising and falling, eyes fixed on the distance. "Home," she said quietly. The word landed like something sacred. He stopped several paces behind her, giving her room. "This is where we part," she said. He felt the statement settle into him, heavy and unavoidable. He had known it from the beginning, had known it in his bones the moment he chose not to ask her name, but knowing something and arriving at it were not the same thing. He cleared his throat. "You're still hurt. I'll make it." "You're sure?" She turned her head enough to glance back at him. In her eyes was something like pity, but sharper, a reminder. "You've watched me walk all day. You know what I am." He swallowed. "Stubborn." "That word is too small," she replied. He almost smiled at that, but it didn't reach his face. For a moment he considered the thing he wanted to say, the simple, selfish line that would make his own chest feel lighter. "Come with me." But he heard her voice from earlier, clear as gunshot in his memory. "Names are how men begin to own things. Helping does not give you claim." And he understood then that asking her to come with him, no matter how gentle he made it, would still be asking her to step into his world, where she would always be measured by what she was to him. So he didn't say it. Instead, he said the only thing that mattered. "I won't follow you," he told her. She studied him. "Why not?" "Because you told me not to," he answered, "and because I finally understand that I don't get to decide what safety costs you." The wind moved between them, pulling at her hair, lifting dust off the ridge like smoke. She looked away toward the canyons again. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, not weak, not yielding, just less sharp. "You think you helped me," she said. "I did," he replied, careful, "but I don't think it gives me anything." She turned fully then, facing him. The sun was high, bleaching the world bright, leaving no shadows to hide in. He could see her clearly now, the dust on her cheeks, the dried blood at her side, the faint scars that marked her skin in patterns he did not understand. He could see exhaustion, yes, but he could also see something harder beneath it, something unbroken. "You didn't save me," she said. "No," he admitted. A pause. "I survived," she said. "Yes." "And I choose," she continued. eyes fixed on his. Where I go next?
The truth of it hit him with unexpected force. He had carried guilt for years, dragging it like a chain he couldn't cut. He had wanted to believe there was a way to balance old wrongs by doing one right thing, by finding someone he could pull from danger and then call himself changed. But standing here, looking at her, he realized the old hunger inside him was just another kind of selfishness dressed up in virtue. He took a slow breath. "You were right," he said. Her brow lifted slightly. "About what?" "About names," he said. "About chains." Her gaze sharpened. "That day," he continued, voice rough, "I thought helping meant taking control for a moment. I thought if I could make the danger stop, it would mean I'd done something worth living with." "And now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "I think the hardest part of helping is accepting you can refuse it." She held his gaze a long moment. Then she stepped closer, closing the distance he had worked so hard to maintain. Not because he pulled her, not because she weakened, because she chose. Her hand rose, and her fingertips touched his cheek lightly, like testing if he was real. The gesture was brief, almost restrained, but it carried weight. "This," she said quietly, "does not mean you are owed anything." "I know," he said. "This does not mean you can follow." "I won't." She studied him one last time, as if deciding whether his words were worth trusting. Then she leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't soft, it was fierce and brief, like a flame flaring before the wind took it. It tasted of dust and water and the sharp honesty of someone who refused to be owned by anyone, not even by a moment. When she pulled back, her eyes were clear. "Now you can remember without believing you possess the memory." He swallowed hard. "I'll remember." "Good," she said. "Then let it change you." She turned away. No lingering look, no promise, just the steady, uncompromising stride of a woman walking into her own land. He watched her go until the distance swallowed her, until the canyons folded her into the world that belonged to her. The sun burned overhead, the wind moved on, the desert returned to silence. He did not follow. When she was gone, he stood there longer than he needed to, not because he hoped she would come back, but because he understood that leaving was part of the lesson, letting the moment settle without chasing it. Finally, he turned west. As he walked, he felt the old chain inside him loosen, not because he had done something heroic, but because he had done something rarer. He had helped without demanding to be the center of the story. He had respected a boundary, even when it hurt, and in the end, that was the only kind of goodness that survived the frontier. Out here, men liked to tell stories about saving women, about taming wild places, about taking what they wanted and calling it destiny. But the West was never tamed by force. It was survived by restraint, by humility, by the quiet strength to recognize another person's freedom, even when it meant standing alone. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that real courage often looks like letting go, then keep riding with us. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for the next tale from the old trails, where choices matter, mercy has a cost, and the strongest hands are the ones that know when not to hold on.